DevilNeverCry.
What is up everyone, it is me DevilNeverCry, and welcome to my first impressions on the first Berserker, Khazan. I was recently invited to check out the closed beta test and wanted to give my thoughts on what I've played so far. You're immediately thrust into the shoes of Khazan, our protagonist, a once great hero falsely accused of treason, now sentenced to death. But not before the Blade Phantom can get its possession trickery going on, wanting to take over Khazan for its own means with him having to resist. Touting itself as a hardcore action RPG, a lot of people have been comparing it to Souls games, which I'd have to agree with, albeit one that's far more linear. The game does feature a stamina management system, where a lot of the difficulty is going to be having a dalliance with death, in that you're going to be trying to fight enemies effectively, whilst also ensuring you have enough stamina left to evade and block. The game also really seems to focus quite heavily on the deflect mechanic, which is why I see a lot of people comparing this to Sekiro. When it comes to mini-bosses and bosses, seemingly the only way I've found to fight effectively is through simply deflecting or parrying attacks. Depleting enemy stamina gauges nets you a critical hit, which does a healthy chunk of damage, which in turn makes fights a whole lot quicker and easier to get through. The game of course also features its own version of bonfires, in which you're able to rest and recuperate, recover your health, recover this game's version of Estus flasks, alongside being able to upgrade Khazan to make him a much more formidable fighter. The game also features multiple different skill trees that allow you to customize Khazan exactly the way you want to. You have skill trees for each of the 3 different weapon types you're able to use in the closed beta, alongside skill trees for his own innate abilities. As expected, each of the 3 weapons play wildly different to each other. The greatsword is huge, lumbering, but hits quite hard. You've got the dual-wielded weapons that you start the closed beta with, which are a little bit of an in-between between speed and power. And then you have the glaive, which has added reach and is slightly quicker, albeit does a little bit less damage. They do feel quite limited at first, but once you start unlocking different moves in the skill tree, things tend to flow a lot quicker during combat. The designs for the weapons themselves felt rather uninspired, though this is only a closed beta test, so who knows, they might have a wider array of designs in the final version of the game. But typically after you faced off against certain bosses or mini-bosses, you would get stronger versions of the weapons that you already have, effectively duplicates with just a higher stat number. The same principles largely applied to the armor too, albeit there were far more different types of armor that I could find that changed Khazan's appearance, making them feel unique overall. They also had their own weight system attributed to them, I believe, where you had lightweight and sort of medium type of armor, where you would effectively have less iframes, I believe, though that wasn't really a system that I found myself paying all too much attention to, primarily because I didn't really focus on dodging all too much. One of the strengths of the game, and something that I personally enjoyed quite a bit, was the game's visual design, particularly the way that the protagonist's stylized look popped against the background, which really helped him look unique and stand out amidst the dreary and drab, bleak environments that you find yourself traversing through. There was also a gratuitous amount of blood, particularly in combat when you're obliterating your enemies, that really sold the idea that Khazan is a berserker out for revenge. But it was details like that, paired with the really crunchy sound design, that helped the combat feel quite cathartic. But violence is definitely at the forefront with this game. Earlier in the video I mentioned that the game, or my time with it, felt rather linear, and that much is true. You'll typically find yourself moving forward, going from point A to point B, with a limited amount of branching paths along the way. The majority of them end in dead ends. Sometimes you'll find enemies, sometimes you'll find single-use items, but overall, whatever it is that you find typically won't be all that interesting, and so you'll often find yourself not really drawn to straying off the beaten path. One thing that I did appreciate, and something that has become a staple of Souls-likes, is the fact that there are shortcuts that will take you back to areas you need to get to, which definitely makes runbacks far more manageable. Speaking of runbacks, the difficulty of the game, as you'd expect, largely comes from the bosses. Provided you're able to tackle the enemies one at a time, things are rather straightforward. The game will attempt to mix things up. At times you'll face 2 enemies, or 3 perhaps, with a couple of them coming at you and somebody in the back throwing projectiles, but again, these are all rather manageable. The game does love to spring traps on you, particularly when you're going to pick up an item and then all of a sudden a swarm of enemies comes to take you out, and in those instances they can lead to early deaths, particularly if you don't scramble enough to get prepared. But overall I'd say the bosses are definitely highlights when it comes to both combat and difficulty. Though I did have a few gripes with the first Berserker Khazan, overall I enjoyed my time with the closed beta test, and it did its job of keeping me interested enough in the title for when it eventually drops sometime in 2025. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on the first Berserker Khazan, and whether or not you think the game is doing enough to differentiate itself from other Souls-likes. If you enjoyed today's video, do be sure to leave a like, and consider subscribing for more previews and reviews. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.